Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the engines that didn't sell. Today I have two original Saito FA-65 engines. Now these two, when I say original, they are the very first iteration of the engine that was produced. Somehow I got lucky enough to get two of them. One of them was given to me as a parts engine from a gentleman several years ago, and the second one I'm really not sure how I came about getting that. But the first one that I was trying to rebuild, it turned out had a broken valve spring on it, and that was really all that was wrong with it. And so here's something you may not know about this original Saito 65 that wasn't even mentioned in the Clarence Lee article because he never tore one down to replace parts. But the valve springs on these engines are not the same size as the modern day Saito 80, Saito 65, even the 56 I believe. So when I went to replace valve springs on this thing, I ordered just a brand new set of springs for a modern day Saito 65, and turns out they wouldn't fit. The area in the head where the spring sits isn't milled out enough for that diameter of a spring. So I was like, holy cow, this really sucks. So I ended up having to buy springs for an FA-45 because they did have smaller diameter springs, and I think the length was even a little bit different. So that's something that's unusual about this original generation Saito 65, in addition to the fact that it's the only small displacement engine that featured this strange air bleed carburetor. The only other Saito engine that ever had this similar type of an air bleed carb was the original Fathead FA-120. But anyway, I didn't sell these engines because I didn't list them really. And I actually had no intention of ever selling them because these are quite rare to find in the original state. And the original state is kind of a hard thing to determine because when you see a review article of one, that's usually an early prototype or a very early, or not an early prototype, a late prototype or a very early production engine, which changes are made to subsequently. And I think in the review article on this, the carburetor had a few different screws on it, but I've got some different carbs. I've got two different carbs on here that are both original to the engine, but they just look slightly different with the way the screw is positioned on them. So, and the first one here also has the original exhaust. Finding one that has all the original parts, at least according to the review article, is pretty hard to come by. Now these are actually high compression engines. They have a domed portion of the piston, so these are actually a high compression engine too. They detuned it, I don't know, a year or two after the initial offering. But this is an excellent running engine, as you can see here. It's incredible. I mean, these things just run and run, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I never sold it. So as you can see, just a supreme example of Saito engineering, and I've always loved Saito engines. The later ones not as much as the early ones, because the early ones just seem to have so much more class to them. But this Saito 65, the original version, is just a real beast. and I really, really like this engine. If you can ever get your hands on one of them, I would highly recommend doing it because it's really worth the effort. The only thing is you're going to have to find one that's got all the original parts and it's in good working order, because you may not be able to find some of the replacement parts, especially like the springs, unless you just put springs from a 45 on there. But anyway, those are two more engines that didn't sell and why.